welcome to this evening's Licensing Committee meeting. Before we begin through the agenda items, I'll first read out the Chairman's introduction. This is a meeting of the Council held in public. It is not a public meeting. There is no fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest exit, nearest the large screen at the front of the room, and proceed down the fire exit to the courtyard. Once it is safe to return, councillors will receive a text message. Officers will also advise when it is safe to return to the meeting. We are recording the meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and also be available on the Council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. So with the introduction done, we'll move on to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Chloe, have we had any apologies for absence this evening?
Thank you, Chair. An apology from Councillor Harrison with Councillor Hilliard as substitute, an apology from Councillor Green with Councillor Murphy as substitute, and an apology from Councillor Aldridge.
Lovely, thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Would any members like to declare an interest on any of the agenda items this evening? That's a no. So moving on to agenda item 3, minutes, confirmation of the minutes of the Licensing Committee held on the 12th of November 2025. Are there any comments on the meeting or comments on the minutes of that meeting before we note them and move on? No. I think, Chloe, for formality, would you like us to proceed to a vote on that? So all those in favour of adopting those minutes as a clear and accurate record? Abstentions? Wonderful. And then moving on to agenda item 4, minutes of subcommittees. To note the minutes of the Licensing Act 2003 subcommittee and miscellaneous licensing subcommittee meetings held on the 3rd of December 2025. Are there any comments from any members on the minutes of those meetings? Anything anyone would like to know before we move on? Wonderful. So, yep, no comments. So we'll move on to agenda item 5, introduction of a new animal licensing policy and animal charter. And I'll now hand over to Alex to present the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this report is to consider the introduction of a new animal activity licensing policy and animal charter document, and it's shown as enclosure number 1, and to agree a 6-week public consultation. This new comprehensive document will replace the existing animal welfare charter. So this new policy and charter has been developed in line with legislation, best practice and statutory guidance to aid applicants, licence holders and decision makers in understanding the licensing requirements under the different acts that fall under, the Animal Welfare Act, the licensing of activities involving animals and zoo licensing, etc. The policy incorporates and replaces the Council's current Animal Welfare Charter, which was reviewed in 2023 and recommended to be incorporated into a new animal activity licensing policy and charter. This policy now comprises of 2 distinct sections. Firstly, the Animal Activity Licensing Policy, and secondly, the Animal Charter. So just briefly, the Animal Activity Licensing Policy, it sets out the Council's duty in relation to licensable animal activities. It is intended to support the licensing authority in making well-informed decisions on applications and notices by highlighting the key factors usually taken into account. It also serves to inform applicants, businesses and local residents about the licensing authority's expectations and scope of its regulatory authority. Basildon Council is legally required to license premises and establishments involved in animal-related activities. These activities encompass, among others, pet shops, dog breeding operations, boarding facilities, animal exhibitions and riding schools. And in accordance with the Act from 2018, the Council is dedicated to carrying out its statutory duties with care and integrity, striving to ensure high levels of compliance and to reduce the risk of animal cruelty and neglect within those licensable activities. The second section is the Animal Charter. So while the Council actively promotes greater awareness of animal welfare throughout its borough, it recognises that some matters lie beyond its jurisdiction. As such, this charter concentrates on area where the Council has clear and direct legal responsibilities. It highlights key priorities and defines the circumstances in which the Council is both authorised and committed to take action. Additionally, the Charter sets out the Council's responsibilities in its capabilities as an employer, landowner, property owner, and as the enforcement authority for legislation relating to licensed premises. The Charter has been developed in alignment with existing animal welfare legislation, which includes the Animal Welfare Act 2006. Just a bit of background on the licensing of animal activities. This came into force on the 1st of October 2018. These regulations replaced several pieces of existing legislation and provided a new single licensing scheme for a number of animal licensing activities. These regulations significantly change the way animal-related businesses are inspected and licensed. So under these regulations, a licence is required for these businesses to engage in. So that's selling animals as pets, boarding cats and dogs, this includes home boarding and doggy daycare, hiring out of horses, breeding of dogs, keeping or training animals for exhibition. The Council also is responsible for issuing and enforcing licences under the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, the Zoo Licensing Act, and the new Animal Welfare Primate licences, which will come into force for the 1st of April 2026. Currently, the Council does not have a formal licensing policy for these activities, and while not legally required, adopting such a policy is considered best practice to ensure transparency, fairness, and consistency in decision making. The Council's animal activity licensing policy and animal charter should be regarded as a local framework for decision making when considering applications, and the licensing committee are required to have due regard to this when forming a decision. On the 21st of December 2025, the government launched its new animal welfare strategy, and this strategy sets out how the government will improve the lives of pets, farm animals and wildlife by 2030. It aims to make sure all animals are treated with care, respect and compassion. Under this new strategy, the government is considering new rules for animal rescue and rehoming centres. This will be a major development for local authorities, as the government's intention to consider this introduction of these new licences, as they currently do not fall under the scope of the animal activity licensing regime, and as such the Council is not able to license them. This will be the first time the sector has been brought formally under a statutory regulation, and DEFRA has raised concerns previously about inconsistent standards and the risk posed by unregulated operators, and has long recognised by licensing professionals. The aim is to make sure animals in these centres are well cared for and that standards are consistent across the country if adopted. This reform would create a new regulated activity requiring local authorities to establish inspection process, develop competency frameworks and oversee compliance and enforcement. The Council does welcome this as a licensing regime for rescue and rehoming centres. The Government plans to roll out this strategy over the next few years, aiming for full implementation by 2030. The Animal Activity Licensing Policy and Animal Charter will be reviewed at significant points through this implementation to ensure that it remains up to date with appropriate legislation. We are going out for consultation, so it's recommended that the committee notes the content of the draft Animal Activity Licensing Policy and the Animal Charter document and instructs officers to commence a 6-week consultation period on the proposals. A 6 weeks consultation is considered as suitable as the Council's approach is strongly determined by statute. Details of the consultation strategy is shown as enclosure number 2. It is proposed that the consultation comments are presented for consideration at the next meeting of the Licensing Committee in 2026, following the end of the 6-week consultation, and allowing time for us to analyse those results and provide responses to them. So the recommendations are the committee considers the introduction of the Animal Activity Licensing Policy and Animal Charter, and the committee authorises the licensing manager to start a 6 weeks consultation with the public, trade and interested parties as shown in the consultation strategy in enclosure number 2. It's the end of my report.
Lovely, thank you for that, Alex. And may I just say as the chairman, I hope I speak for the committee as well in passing on my thanks to yourself and your team for all the hard work that's been put in to create this policy for the benefit of ensuring hopefully good animal welfare across the borough. I think it does mark a step forward, and I think it's a positive report and something that should be welcomed. Before I kind of go to committee members for any questions to the officer or kind of comments on the policy and the recommendations for this item this evening, ahead of the meeting I was contacted by Councillor Aidan McGarren, the Cabinet Member for Environment and Leisure, under whose portfolio this issue rests, asking for me to read out a brief statement, and I'll just do that before we kind of proceed into questions to the officers. So, this is the statement from Councillor Aidan McGarren, the Cabinet Member for Environment and Leisure. I'm sorry I cannot be present tonight, but would like to thank Grant Taylor and his team for the work they have put into this policy, which is timely, welcome and sensible. One of the main motivating factors behind the policy is to bring it more in keeping with what the Council can do and actually affect. It also recognises that as things stand, some matters are beyond its jurisdiction, which leads me on to the fact that the Government, as part of its animal welfare strategy, is introducing new rules for animal rescue and rehoming centres. As you will probably know, councils presently have no jurisdiction over them. Basildon Council has lobbied for this change and welcomes it and hopes it will be introduced as soon as practically possible. We will continue to lobby for the resources to ensure we can carry out this function properly. I would encourage you to share this policy as widely as possible with residents so that we can have as meaningful a consultation as possible. Thank you. And following that, so any members of the committee like to ask any questions to the officer and comment on the policy? Councillor Sargent.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And I really do thank Alex, because at the end of the last meeting we spoke about this policy. And as people probably are aware of the awful incident that happened in Stuart and I's ward last year over in Crays Hill, and we would not want that occurring any further. So I seek clarity. I listened intently to what you were saying, Alex, because as we all know, it's very, very difficult on licensing under the incident that happened last year. And even though the chairman said that the new policy is covering better requirements from people, it's the boarding and the homing, accommodation, licensing and insurance that covers those people. So incidents of the nature I've just spoke about do not happen again. So the clarity I'm seeking, Alex, is will the policy go anywhere near it? If it doesn't, are we as a licensing committee able, within the consultation, able to put something down to go to government, or even the chairman writes a letter on our behalf? Because that incident isn't just happening here, it must be happening over the country. And for the safety of animals, I for one would like to see that happen. Thank you.
As outlined in the report, animal rescues and rehoming centres are not currently licensable and therefore fall outside of the scope of the licensing framework. As we had mentioned, there is the animal welfare strategy from the government that is looking at the possibility of bringing them into a licensing regime, which we will bring this policy back before committee should that happen, to incorporate that as well into there. Okay, but currently it's not in there.
Lovely. Alex, I think you touched on an important point there in terms of reviewing and updating policy. I think normally it's kind of standard process that policies are kind of automatically then looked at and reviewed every 3 to 5 years. But I think specifically for this policy, and given that there may be coming changes to legislation as a result of the government's publication of the animal welfare strategy late last year, which again I think looks at again banning puppy farming and curbing low welfare dog breeding, and particularly looking at then giving local authorities that power to then licence the kind of the rescue and rehoming centres. So should there be a change, whether it's later this year or next year, there's that process in place so that we can make very timely changes and updates to this policy?
Yeah, somewhere within that policy, it does state that although the policy is formally subject to a 5-year review cycle, we will bring forward an early review whenever significant legislative or strategic changes occur. So those will be brought in.
I think Councillor Lawrence.
I see the phone ringing.
Was that yours?
It's not my phone. Thank you, Chair. Alex, considering what Councillor Sargent was saying about what happened in her and Stuart's ward, and naturally we're all concerned about that, is there any way that we can feed in via the chairman to government to say, look, we've had this issue in Basildon, and you know, we want to support some changes?
So if you want to make a recommendation to lobby government in relation to that, there has been lobbying of government. There is obviously a public petition that's reached over 100,000 signatures and therefore is being debated in Parliament. But if you wish to lobby MPs and government, then as the chair of licensing, if that's a recommendation, I'm sure that can be put in as a recommendation and we can do that. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Sargent. I think I didn't respond to that part. I responded to the rest of it and didn't respond to that part about lobbying. So, yeah, we did.
Wonderful, thank you, Councillor. Any further questions, Councillors? Lovely. So, any other members? So, Councillor Murphy.
Dog breeding. Obviously, if somebody's got 25 dogs and doing it for a living, at the moment we can license it. What about a private person who has got a couple of bitches who put them to, what is the right for a stud or cover them, whatever, in their own home? Is that now going to be licensed, or should it be licensed?
It should be licensed. It's quite a complicated subject because part of it does look at something called the business test as well that's in there. So we do look at a whole raft of things. So if they're advertising for sale, if they meet a business test, and there is another section as well of 3 or more litters a year, but it can be less than those litters if they're advertising them for sale. And it can be people breeding from home. We have specific inspections and we have qualified inspectors that will go out and do those inspections. On new applicants, we are required to take a vet with us, so we do take a vet at all first licensed applicants for dog breeding to make sure that, you know, the vets are happy with those standards as well.
May I inquire what the cost of a licence might be, bearing in mind if you're taking a vet with you, a couple of hours of vet time, which I imagine is quite expensive, plus of course our council time, plus paperwork time.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I've got to have a look at the fees and charges for that. Sorry, I will do that in a second. The vet fee they pay for. So the initial inspection, the vet charge is paid for by the applicant. So we recover the cost for that vet charge from the applicant. Following that, we have an application fee and a grant fee, which is like a maintenance fee. Your license is risk rated, so it's rated and given a star rating. So the application fee and grant fee is a standard fee, and your license could be 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 star license, and those equate to a length of license. So you can have a 1 year, 2 year or 3 year license depending on your star rating. The higher the star rating, the higher standards. And then if you so if you get a 5 star, it's a 3 year license and you've hit higher standards as well as, you know, of the inspection. The fees for dog breeding is for a brand new application, it's £237 and then £150 for the grant fee. So £237 for the application and £150 for the grant fee. And for renewal is £182 and the grant fee is £150. But obviously for a new applicant, on top of that initial fee, it will be the vet fee and what they charge for that first inspection. Our cost of inspection is built into those fees.
Obviously, people who are doing this for a living obviously are probably aware of this, because obviously if you're doing anything for a living, you look into it. I just feel there must be a mass of people, and I know at least two. A friend of mine had 2 dogs and bred them in her home, had 8 puppies and sold them all, and probably wasn't even aware she had a licence. How are we going to get the general public to adhere to this law when, like most things, nobody's got a clue about it?
So for us, it's about more awareness. So we have looked and put in the charter about more advice and information on websites. So we're looking at redoing our website. There will be more, maybe comms is what we're also looking at. It will build into a strategy of how we can do it. We do also act on information. So if we get information in relation to breeding or complaints in relation to a breeder, we will contact them, explain to them the requirements for licensing, encourage obviously licensing and inspection and regulation through that way. But we do have a number of breeders that are licensed with us and within it.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. No doubt there is a number of breeding, but the problems with all this licensing is the people who are doing it as a living, they know what they're doing and they're getting a licence. The people who are doing it on the side for whatever reason, they're the people who do not, and they're the people, I feel, that are putting the animals at risk.
I think this is one of the reasons for our policy, to bring out a policy, is to be clear information for members of the public as well, to understand the requirements for licensing, and also the requirements that if you are buying a dog, you can check if they have a license and if they have a licensed breeder. So this is where, you know, with the policy coming out and having it out for consultation and promoting the consultation, we want to build awareness with that, so that we can build on that going forward through the years.
I've got 2 others here. Accidental breeding is one, but I presume you've covered that, because obviously if it's accidental, it's accidental. However, the people could still buy them. So the last one is, what are the fines and the
enforcement action,
consequences, fines, and to stop people doing this on the quiet if they decide not to adhere to the licence regime?
So within the policy, we've got the animal welfare regulations under enforcement. It brings you up what the prosecutable or what the offences are. So there is an offence of operating a licensable activity without a licence. It's punishable by up to 6 months imprisonment, a fine, or both. Okay. There are enforcement stages that we would go up and follow a stepped enforcement approach. So we follow the corporate enforcement approach, as well as, you know, within this policy we have what the offences are under each different act.
Going away from dogs, I've got next fireworks. Ever since, I don't know, when I was a child, fireworks were let off on the 5th of November and or the nearest Saturday too, the 5th of November. Now...
Mr. Murphy, I'm not sure that's necessarily, I've checked with the officer, I'm sorry to cut you off, I'm not sure necessarily, does the policy necessarily cover this? I know obviously that...
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
I have read it. Yes, now we seem to have fireworks let off probably most nights, especially at the weekends, for birthdays, etc, etc. What is the council's policy going to be to stop this? Because it is a pain in the neck sometimes. It seems that we have a group of people over the back of us that seem to do it on a regular basis. Once every couple of months they must have birthdays and family parties, and the highlight is letting off fireworks at midnight.
So, in relation to animals, within the Charter, there is a section in there under fireworks. So, the Council supports the provision of an organised displays by responsible organisations rather than individual domestic displays. Measures to assist in ensuring animal welfare during fireworks displays are available on the Council website. There is a new bill being introduced into the Parliament to establish a licensing regime of fireworks, giving local authorities powers to regulate and enforce their use in certain circumstances. It's not in yet, but there is a bill going through. It is the Fireworks Noise Control etc. bill. It aims to tackle concerns over the impact of loud and unpredictable fireworks on communities, vulnerable groups and animals. The bill proposes noise limits for fireworks sold to the public, mandatory labelling of noise levels and a licensing framework enabling councils to restrict the use in areas with repeated problems. Enforcement will be carried out by local authorities rather than the police, with civil penalties for misuse. The bill is not intended to ban fireworks outright, but to ensure that they are used safely and predictably. Organised displays would continue, but councils would gain tools to respond to local complaints. It is in the Charter, but the bill is not in yet. That is what is currently going through. We've mentioned it in there so that people are aware that that's what's being looked at currently. Issues with fireworks and antisocial behaviour, Essex Police have got a website that links to that you can report antisocial behaviour and fireworks on there. But unfortunately, the regulation of fireworks sits with sort of Essex County Council at the moment, and this bill's not in place. But it may fall to trading standards, rather than a second tier licensing authorities at the moment. Okay.
Lovely, thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Sargent, you'd like to come back in?
Yes, because this, I'm sure to all of us, this policy and charter is extremely important. Can we not do a comms campaign once this goes out for consultation? I think it's really worthy of it. I mean, going back to the Crays Hill incident, there's been a campaign group set up, and it might be a kind of area where they can put their words into, into the consultation, and also to make the general public more aware that we now have a policy, because my colleague here has just highlighted a number of items and issues, and so therefore there's more people that can see the policy and respond to it, particularly on the fireworks and the breedings, etc., because it is the welfare of animals matters so much to so many people. So if we can, I mean, I'll leave it to you, Alex, or the chairman, to go to comms and say to them, come on, let's have a nice little campaign here so that we can get some responses. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, we will build comms into the consultation so that obviously it will go out to public. It is normally we send out comms for members of the public to understand that we've got this consultation outgoing. So yeah, we will discuss with comms a strategy for that with the consultation, and obviously going forward.
Thanks, Alex. Would there any other members like to comment? Any questions? Councillor Adam.
Yes, about this scoring matrix that there is on page 25, I think, 28. What's that about?
It's much easier when I've got the matrix in front of me. I know it very well. So it's a risk rating. It's a matrix. It's for inspectors. For when they go out, but it's also in the policy for information for licence holders and those that want to be licence holders, and for members of the public. It's when an inspector goes out, they have a list of a very in-depth inspection form to go through. They have to meet the minimum standards. If they meet the higher standards, that takes them into the higher standard set. There's a minimum standards. and then there is another column, the first column, that says sort of minor failings, which is normally a little bit of paperwork failings on there. So we would work across how whether they had minor failings, whether they met the minimum standards or whether they met the higher standards, and then on the rows across it's low risk or high risk. So separate from that inspection, we have a risk rating, which has a number of questions, things like, have there been complaints? Is there a history? Have they got a general maintenance plan? Have they got policies and procedures in place? And we score them out of a certain number from there. So if they get a low risk, then they're able to get a higher star rating. If they're high risk, then there's obviously some issues there that we've picked up on, like there might be complaints, and then that would then give them a slightly lower star rating depending on what column they're in, and a less length of license. So our goal with the risk rating and with that matrix, this has been set up by legislation and by DEFRA. The goal is for people that if you want to be licensed, we have one set of fees. So you can either pay that fee for 1 year, or you can pay that fee for 3 years if you hit the higher standards and you are low risk, and you're meeting all of those conditions. Does that help explain it a little bit for you?
So really, if they got a rating that gives them a 5-star 3-year license, they just have to pay for the license once, and then that's okay. That's an established one. But if they're a bit lower for some other reason, they only get a license for a year, and you have to keep going back to them. So
they'd have to be renewed. Also, the risk rating and the star rating gives us, and the length of license gives us the number of times that we will, the length of time it is that we will go back and do a midterm. So we do an inspection at renewal, which is quite an in-depth inspection. A lot of the time, my colleagues and I are there for about an hour and a half, probably, depends on the size. If they're bigger ones, we can be there quite a long time. And then we do a midterm. So if it's a 1-year license, we'll do a midterm in 6 months. If it's a 3-year license, we'll do a midterm after 18 months. So it's an extra length of time for us to go out. Those are the unannounced midterm visits that we would do.
Any further questions or comments from members of the committee? In that case, then we'll move to the recommendations on page 23 of the report pack, and I think as I've sent some consensus amongst the committee, I think we'll take them together with the added recommendation from Councillors Sargent and Lawrence that the chairman of the licensing committee writes to the relevant government department to lobby for higher standards in animal welfare and licensed rescue homes. So with that, we'll go to the vote. So all those in favour of the recommendations? Lovely, that is unanimous. Thank you. And I think that concludes all the items of business on the agenda for this evening. So thank you everybody for coming, and I wish you a safe journey home.